Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest stories in MMA. On today's episode, the UFC 299 card in Miami. We'll unpack that. There was some boxing in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, what they're calling maybe the new sports capital of the world. And I don't have a third geographical location to talk about, so I'll just remind everyone that I'm in Arequipa, Peru. Hello, everyone. Gorgeous George here on the con, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. SBC creator goes from MMA Junkie Radio. He's in Las Vegas. The Boston shot caller, Nolan King. He's in Boston. He was in Miami covering the event, so it'll be nice to have him and his expertise. And Big John McCarthy. Does anything else need to be said? Hall of Fame ref, outstanding color commentator, and those unified rules of MMA. Yeah, he kind of came up with those. Thank you, John. Cold coffee on the ones and twos. He's our outstanding producer. But before we get started, if you could kindly tap that like button, like right now, I'd greatly appreciate it. It's the algorithm, baby. Boom, boom, get that show popping. That second boom is subscribe and like. All right, guys. Sean O'Malley soundly defeated Marlon Vera in the main event at UFC 299 this past Saturday night. In the process of defending his title for the first time, he also erased his only professional loss. We're looking at quite an impressive resume here for the 29-year-old as he stands at 18-1-1, that one being a no contest at the very end. I want to see what you guys think of the guy's future and if he can be one of the all-time greats at bantamweight. That's what we do, right? Someone wins a title, we start wondering what's the future for them. So can he be the best ever? He'd have to eclipse Aljamain Stewart and Dominic Cruz's record, UFC record, of 3 title defenses. I also want to point out Dominic Cruz had 2 title defenses at WEC, where most of the basically best lightweight class fighters were housed before the UFC absorbed them. So maybe keep that in mind. All right, guys, can he be one of the greatest ever? Yay or nay? We go to Nolan King for the first take.
Well, coming out of that performance, I mean, Sean O'Malley once again showed a great rate of improvement, something we've seen pretty consistently from his time on The Ultimate Fighter when Snoop Dogg was yelling O'Malley into the microphone. He has come so far over that period of time. He has proved so many people wrong in these performances as of late. I mean, remember when he got matched up with Peter Yan a few years ago and everybody was saying that the UFC was fast-tracking him and that he had no business being in the cage with Yan and that he hadn't earned it? Then he goes out there and he wins a close, split decision. And then he gets matched up with Aljamain Sterling, a guy he called the most difficult stylistic matchup in the division for him. He goes out there and beats Aljo. And then on Saturday night, he goes out there and has an absolutely clinical performance against Marlon Chito Vera. So I definitely feel like a fool for ever doubting the guy in the small periods of time where I did. So I really don't want to say that he can't do this. But if you look at some of the matchups that are in this division right now, I do think that they prove to be extremely difficult for him. If we're talking about Merab, if we're talking about, Corey Sandhagen, Umar Nurmagomedov, these are guys that I think are very tricky. And as we've seen, as the sport has progressed, it is very difficult for champions to hold their titles for a significant period of time. I mean, the era where there was Dom Cruz and Jose Aldo and Anderson Silva holding the belts for title defense after title defense after title defense, we don't really see that anymore. So as much as I'm a believer in Sean O'Malley, as much as I think that he is truly elite and could very well establish himself as one of the best bantamweights ever, I'm not quite sure that the next matchup that's waiting around the corner in Merab Dvalishvili allows him to, at least in this title reign, hit that mark that you were just asking about, George. But again, not taking anything away from Sean, because that was just a tremendous performance on Saturday night.
You ain't lying, Nolan. For 25 minutes, this guy did not take his foot off the gas pedal. That's what impressed me the most. Goes, man, what do you think? Just like what Nolan was saying, taking us back to that old, sweaty and hot, tough gym in Las Vegas before the swanky Apex. We were there when O'Malley was there, and we were thinking, look at this guy. He ain't going to make it into the UFC, maybe past another fight or two. He's a world champ with a title defense now.
Yeah, that gym was something else. I think Nolan King was on an airplane that kind of resembled that last night. But look, man, what Sean O'Malley did Saturday was pretty amazing. I mean, people are always going to underestimate this guy because of the path that he took. Obviously the UFC, he's one of their favorites, and they treat him accordingly. But wins like the last one over Aljamain Sterling, the one that he had Saturday night, that's what starts to kind of erase that in people's minds. Sean continues to improve his game from fight to fight, and they're not like little jumps, they're big leaps, man. He looks really good. And so I have to imagine that we're probably going to see that again going forward. But the guy in front of him, Merab Dvalishvili, that's just so difficult, because to start off, if you look at the Marlon Vera fight, Sean's striking is so crisp, right? It looks so great. But you can do that when you don't have that threat of the takedown, right? Now you can really step into your punches. You're a lot lighter on your feet. Once that threat is there, you can't really operate that way. I'm not going to say that his striking is going to look terrible from one fight to the next, but it's probably not going to be as crisp and sharp as it was against Marlon Vera with Merab and the threat of that takedown. Things are going to kind of change for him a little bit. So this fight, it's brutal. The division's brutal. It's not so much that I'm taking shots at Sean O'Malley that he can't do it. Just about anyone, it's going to be difficult to put together 3-4 fights, wins in a row. That's hard to ask out of this division. And the pace that Sean O'Malley's keeping seems pretty good. I'm pretty impressed at everything he's been able to do. If he gets past this next fight, which has to be Merab Dvalishvili, then I think he probably has a better chance of doing it. But the first roadblock is probably the biggest.
Yeah, and John, I feel like a dweeb for almost focusing on, can this guy be a great or not? Because it is a rough road, and I know you're going to cover that. But before that, maybe talk about just what a great title fight and title defense it was, and then maybe blend into that question that I asked. We got to give this guy his flowers. He looked great on Saturday.
Well, you said one thing, and I'm going to point it out, for everyone right now. It's the 5th round that tells me everything I need to know about Sean O'Malley, because he had won 4 rounds in a row straight. And his trainer, Tim Welsh, comes out between the 4th and 5th round, says, hey, you're doing great. Just, just stay away from him. You don't have to do anything. You've got this in the bag. And he basically tells Sean to go into a prevent. Go into prevent defense. You don't have to do anything. Sean O'Malley did not do that. He went after Cheeto, and he put a beautiful round together, which tells me the dude does not take the foot off the gas. And he put on an absolutely impressive performance. He is in the toughest, in my opinion. The bantamweight division is the most stacked division across MMA. It has just killers, because you have to be good at everything to be in, consideration for the top 10. These guys are just unbelievable. They can do it all, and they do it all well. I can understand why everyone's sitting there looking at Merab and saying that is a stylistic nightmare for Sean O'Malley. It is. It's his worst. If you're going to look at it, that's the guy that he's got the best chance. But you can also take a look at, I would love to see the matchup of Corey Sandhagen going up against Sean O'Malley. I would love to see Umar Nurmagomedov go up against Sean O'Malley. And that's what makes it so hard for him to hold on that title. The other part is, where is Sean O'Malley's mind at? Because as soon as he got done with Cheeto, he's calling out the featherweight champion in Ilya. And I understand why he's doing that. That's a target, and that's a great thing for Sean O'Malley, because it's, as a champion, you don't have that target to put on someone that you're going after him. They have it to put on you. So he's trying to create that target, but he's going to have to go through the guys in his weight division, and it's going to be very tough to go through those guys without someone coming out on top.
Yep, and we actually have an audio clip of that call out of Ilia Topuria. Let's go to that. Cold Coffee, hook us up.
Give me a jet to Spain, baby. I'm coming for Ilia Topuria. And if he doesn't want it, I want Ilia, baby. Give me Ilia.
Why does that fight excite you so much?
He's a scary dude. Ilia excites me. Going up a weight class excites me. But I'm here for whatever. If you guys want me to knock out Merab, I'll do that too. But Ilia's an exciting fight for the people.
Well, Sean, congratulations on an absolutely spectacular performance. It was an honor calling your fight.
I love how he says, give me that jet to Spain. And he doesn't mention money or any of the other stuff that a lot of fighters gravitate towards that sometimes turn off fans a little bit. He just says, I want a tough challenge. Man, respect to the champ for that comment. That was tremendous there. Great stuff, guys. I can't say enough about what O'Malley did on Saturday night. I do want to say a couple things. I saw a guy pointing out, I may have said Aljamain Stewart. Sorry, Aljamain Sterling. But I know I didn't make the mistake of the Ultimate Fighter. It was called the Ultimate Fighter Gym. I know he wasn't on the Ultimate Fighter. It was Dana White Contender Series, so I won't take any heat on that one. Guys, let's go back around the horn one more time, though. This is a big fight to talk about. The main event at UFC 299, Sean O'Malley defending his title against Marlon Vera. What's the criteria that O'Malley must meet, Nolan, for you personally, before even jumping to challenge the featherweight champion? Is it an amount of title defenses, or is it just something else that tells you now you can go and leave your division behind and become even greater?
I think title defenses certainly strengthen it, but for me, it's always who else is in your division, right? Like if you hit a point in time where there's a lull or there's rematches, I think that's when a champion can start looking at other divisions. But when you have a thriving division full of fresh matchups and really hungry title challenger worthy opposition in your division, I think it would be such a disservice to 135 pounds and all those fighters for you to put the division on pause. And the same thing with Ilya at 145. You'd be essentially clogging up two divisions that are really strong right now. So for me, title defenses strengthen your argument, but really it's where the division's at and kind of who's around you.
How about you, Goes? You got any criteria that must be met before a champ can move up or down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is clearing out your division. There was a time where I think champ was big, right? There weren't too many of them. Now there's so many of them that have accomplished that it's just kind of dropped a little bit, in my opinion. The road to getting to that hasn't been as long for other people. So when people are talking about who are the greatest bantamweights of all time 10 years from now, the first thing you got to look at are title defenses. And so it just depends as a fighter, like what do you want to be remembered for, right? For me, I think you're in your prime, do as much as you can in your division, completely wipe that out and claim that best bantamweight of all time, and then look up. And if I'm Poirier, I mean, other than money, I don't really get that call out either, because what does that do for you? I mean, we all remember being in high school, right? When you were a junior and a senior, if a freshman challenged you to a fight and you mop the floor with them, you're not going to celebrate. That's what you're supposed to do. This guy's smaller than you. He's coming up and he's fighting the best guy at 145. It doesn't really do that much for you. Maybe you'll get a nice little paycheck, but if I'm him, I kind of concentrate on what I have. And if anything, I look up, not down.
What if that freshman had a hot girlfriend and she went, oh, hello?
You only have so much time, man. Once you go to college, it's not too cool to go, oh, yeah, my girlfriend, the sophomore, will be out later. Let's go pick her up. Like
that's a good point.
Cool.
Plus, there's that number 18 there, that dividing thing that can get people in trouble. John, what about you, man? Like, you've been around the sport in so many ways. Does it really behoove, like Goz said, a lot of them have done it now, but is there really something special to it? Here's why. We did the 30 greatest fighters in UFC history when the UFC got to 30 years last year. All the guys at the top, they didn't have that champ status other than GS. Well, I take it back. I guess Jones had just gotten it, but yeah. It wasn't those accomplishments. The win over Bisping and the win over who do you mean Cyril Gane? It wasn't what put them at 1 and 2. It was the greatness that came from title defenses and owning a division. What are your thoughts on all this?
No, I think you said it exactly right. You said what I was going to talk about is Alexander Volkanovski is the latest rendition of let's put a champ against a champ. He did it going against Makhachev, who just won the title, but it was Volkanovski that did the work that made it to where you say he deserves that. He went through everyone in the featherweight division at that time, basically, and put himself in that position where you could say, I don't want to see the rematch. I want to see him fight someone that's going to challenge him. John Jones did the same thing forever. Everything was in light heavyweight. No one could beat him. You take a look at Georges St. Pierre. He was in a welterweight and then retired, but came back to fight Bisping as a middleweight. And you go, it makes sense. I like that call. When you take a look at what it takes for me to have a champion face another champion has that champion gone through everybody within reason that you could say that person could beat him? That person is a challenge in their own weight class. If you've done that, you've beat them, then I say, okay, let's go after the other champion.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right, guys, we move on to the co-main event. Let's talk about that. At UFC 299, Dustin Poirier defeated Benoit Saint-Denis and once again impressed the masses. Team Makhachev, more specifically, Ali Abdelaziz, who is Islam Makhachev's manager, seems open to Islam Makhachev defending his lightweight title versus Poirier in June when the UFC goes to Saudi Arabia. With other title contenders ahead in the pecking order, but also booked, what do you think of this possible fight booking? Fair or foul? Goes?
I mean, look, I think it's foul, but if anybody's deserved to have a little foul in their life, it's probably been Dustin Poirier with what he's accomplished throughout his entire career. Taking on that matchup, that's a guy that a lot of people didn't want to fight. And he took that fight, kind of did the UFC a solid there. I think he's kind of deserved to call his own shot a little bit, but first things first, we got to get through UFC 300, right? Like, let's see what plays out there. If you look at Oliveira, if you look at Justin Gaethje, if both those guys get wins, we're going to have an absolute nightmare on our hands. What it could come down to is timing. That might be in the favor of Dustin Poirier, but really when you start to break down the three of them and what they've done and who deserves what, Dustin Poirier is probably at the bottom of that, right? You look at Dustin Poirier. I mean, his last loss to Justin Gaethje in that little not circle, but the back and forth that they've had, that puts him behind Justin Gaethje. If you look at Oliveira, you could say, all right, well, he beat Justin Gaethje, but he also lost to the champion. Justin Gaethje would be a fresh matchup. There's so many ways of just kind of playing this around. Really what it's going to end up coming down to is who comes out unscathed, what the timing is like. The UFC plays by their own rules, man. Sometimes the rankings are there. Most of the time they're just not. Erase the ranking, and I promise you there's a dollar sign behind that number, and that's how things get run. So really, you got to look at what position we're in after UFC 300. But if they gave it to Dustin Poirier, I think it's one of those reactions where I think a lot of people would go, hey, and then 2 seconds later go, all right.
All right. I'll let them know. Yeah. Sorry, goes. Armenia's tripping. They said you forgot to mention our guy. You mentioned Oliveira and Gaethje, and let's not forget
if they get their
Arman Tsarukyan's in the mix. I had to kind of calm things down a little bit. Big John, what do you think, man? Fair or foul for them to be possibly entertaining a Poirier-Makhachev matchup, given the fact that all these other guys are booked?
Look, it's exactly what goes to say. It's timing. Timing is what makes matches at times possible, and other times it's not possible. It's injuries. It's all these things. And you have Charles and Justin. They're going to be in UFC 300. You don't know what's going to happen. A lot of people think Justin's just going to run through a guy named Max Holloway. That's not an easy fight. Let's just, look at it. Charles Oliveira, he's got this guy, like you just said, Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, they both, when you face a guy that's a top guy, you're going to come out banged up. It is just part of training camp and the fight itself. I look at Dustin Poirier has put himself into a position of timing. He has done what the UFC has asked of him. He took a fight with a guy that had a way lower ranking. A lot of guys don't want to do that. He went out there and he put on a very impressive performance as far as he was in trouble and he kept digging deep. And you know what? St. Denis was trying to drown him, couldn't do it. He knocks him out. He puts himself in a position to possibly get that shot for the title. And everything that Dustin Poirier has done throughout his career, I believe, makes that a good title shot.
All right, great stuff. Nolan, man, what do you think here? Fair or foul for them to even consider Poirier versus Makhachev in June in Saudi Arabia, considering all the other top cats are booked?
Yeah, I think it's fair. I mean, the timeline, it's not like somebody, one of the fighters from UFC 300, whoever kind of positions themselves as the front runner for the next title shot will be screwed and have to sit out a year or wait for a whole nother cycle to come through. Would they even be able to go again in June, right? I mean, that's only 5 or 6 weeks after UFC 300 is this Saudi Arabia card. So for me, I think if the UFC is just looking to book something, kind of get a big main event, 2 big names on the books for Saudi Arabia, I mean, who knows how much that plays into this whole thing too. Which fight does Saudi Arabia want? It seems like they might have a little bit more say in what happens here than some of the other tourism boards that the UFC's been signing these deals with, right? So I think it's fair. I think Dustin Poirier certainly done enough over the span of his career to kind of get a bone thrown his way. And after Saturday night, it seems like a lot of fans are kind of backing that idea as well.
Jono 808 says Makhachev mauls Poirier 1 throughout 5. Wow. Cayman Writer says, excuse me, that's another comment there. Crisco Wild says, I want to see Makhachev fight both Poirier and Gaethje. It doesn't really matter to me in which order, though Justin should get the first shot. And then here's another comment I want to chime in on. Me Diamond 44. He says, pretty hilarious that Ali would publicly lobby for Poirier to get a title shot against Islam, considering he also represents Justin Gaethje. I got to imagine that he checked in with Justin Gaethje before he put that out. And one thing I know about Justin Gaethje that he's been pretty clear about, he does not take fights on late notice. He likes at least 3 months to prepare. So back to what you guys said, timing, it probably wouldn't work out for him anyway, unless he pulled a McGregor over Aldo 13-second win, and came out unscathed. And even then, I wouldn't know, because he's got to decompress from the fight and the training camp. The training camp's basically all the work, folks. The rest is just fun. So keep that in mind, me Diamond. I imagine that got cleared at some point, but I think it's a hardcore knowledge comment there from you, and all those comments and questions that come through the chat. I'll try to get through some of the best ones. Let me get back to the show here. I want to ask you guys a question. Going back to Goes, if Poirier misses out on a title shot, who would you pair him up with next?
It's such a nightmare, man, because you have to look at this as a business, right? The UFC, I don't know if they want to give him a monster, but it's kind of hard to avoid in that division, especially when you consider the type of fighters that he's fought throughout his entire career. I guess Gamrot maybe, but that's a tough
teammate though.
They're also teammates.
Yeah, they're also teammates, but you don't have very many options. Like, who do you? If it were me, I would give him somebody along the lines of a Bobby Green who he's already fought. But that's the thing, you're going to run into a lot of guys that he's already fought. They'd have to be some kind of placeholder fight. If you, having to fight Benoit Saint-Denis and then another top level talent like that's a lot to ask out of Dustin Poirier. And then your reward is Makhachev. I mean, dude, these divisions are insane.
Big John, how about you? You got a name for me? Who do you think you would match up Poirier with if he doesn't go to Saudi Arabia for a title fight?
If he doesn't go to Saudi Arabia and get that title fight, you can take a look again. There's a lot of guys that are unavailable. You're not going to be able to put him against Justin Gaethje again. You're not going to put him against Saruki, and they're kind of teammates also. So you got Saruki and Gamrot that are kind of out of the equation. But there is this guy. He's called the Tarantula, Jalen Turner. That would be an interesting fight between him and Dustin. I would love to see Dustin Poirier going up against Jalen Turner. I think it would be freaking lights out.
Okay. How about you, Nolan? Who do you like here for Poirier if he misses out on the title fight?
It's so tough, man, because we're also playing with the whole thing with Dustin only really taking fights that he wants too. I think obviously that was the big surprise that he took this one, because tough, risk reward. It seems like he's really balancing that, and it's sometimes tough to get him on board as well. So I don't know, man. It's really difficult because a lot of the guys that are open at 155 right now are guys that have cross-trained or trained at ATT. So I do like Big John's suggestion of Jalen Turner. Outside of that, I think we'll have to wait and have some things play out before there's really any more good candidates to really think is a viable option here.
Josh Wallace in the chat says that would be one hell of a fight. Dustin versus the Tarantula. Ziggy814 says Dustin versus Edwards. And then Pro Fights Info says shout out to the legend Big John. Also, last weekend's fights were amazing. Haven't had that much fun watching fights with a group or friends in a while. Guys, let me throw this at you. If McGregor takes Chandler, how about Diaz versus Poirier? And if McGregor takes Diaz, how about running it back with Chandler? Would Poirier even want that? I don't know, because like you guys say, it seems like he needs a certain level of name value. He already kind of did the BSD thing. No disrespect to him. We know he's a killer, up and coming, but he kind of already did that. What would you guys think of? I really love Diaz versus Poirier.
I love that matchup, but it's just trying to get Nate Diaz in a room and get him to agree to something like that would be. And Dana kind of had some comments towards Diaz where you could tell he's just sort of over him a little bit. But yeah, if they could make that happen, I think that fits perfectly.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on, guys. Longtime Bellator veteran Michael Venom Page debuted in the UFC with a win over Kevin Holland. Though he didn't get the finish, he won on all the judges' scorecards 29-28. I want to know your grade, 1 through 10, A through F, whatever, on MVP's debut as a whole, because we saw him on the embedded when he landed in the 305, and then everything he did, the the media that he did, right? The one-on-one stuff, the press conference, the weigh-ins, the walkout, his fight, his post-fight. What did you guys think of all that as a whole? We'll go to Big John, someone who knows MVP very closely.
If you're going to give him a grade, I'm going to give him a B+ because everything that he did as far as media and the promotion of the fight and talking about the UFC and building, hey, how great they've been treating him and all these good things. He was phenomenal at doing that. He came into the cage, and what people need to realize is when you go from one promotion to another, there is a difference. It's a difference in just the familiarity with what's going to go on in the back and how things are done. It's just a different feel. And it doesn't mean that you're not being treated good at both. It's just different. And I knew that MVP would have nerves getting into that UFC cage, the octagon, for the first time, even though he's a seasoned veteran. So that would be the one thing that I was going to look at and say, how is he going to react? He reacted well. I could see where he got a little winded, and he doesn't normally get winded, and he got winded based upon nerves, the adrenaline, all of that. You take a look at his performance, it was phenomenal. I think Kevin Holland is just a hellaciously good fighter. He's tough. He's good everywhere. He's got power in his hands. He's got a great chin, and he got just murked in that fight. There was nowhere that he was doing well except for when he was on the ground, when Michael Venom Page made a mistake, went to the ground, and he had his chance, and he landed some good elbows. But in the stand-up, he didn't land anything. He was totally frustrated in the fight. You could see the frustration. He had no idea. And I've heard it from other fighters fighting MVP. They all say, I had no idea how truly fast he was until all of a sudden I was in there. He covers distance different and quicker than everybody else out there. And it's something, if you're not training with a Ray Daniels or a teammate of Michael Venom Page, Norbert Navigny, you're going to have a hard time trying to figure this guy out until you're in there, and then it's a little too late. He did a great job in the fight. The whole Bellator versus, he's an MMA fighter who now fights for the UFC. The real problem for everybody is in the welterweight division, now you got another problem. You got a guy that he is a nightmare to fight. The UFC has a great situation now, and you know what? I think they're going to use it well.
All right, Nolan, what did you think of MVP's debut as a whole? Give it a grade.
Yeah, I give it a B+, A-. I was just really impressed from start to finish, the way he carried himself, the way he promoted himself. I mean, even before he signed the contract, the night before Dana White announced that he had signed with the UFC, MVP posted a promo with him walking up to a table with two gloves, one with the UFC and one with PFL. That's all stuff that he's been doing on his own. This Undertaker entrance was something that was his idea, and he put into motion. So great job promoting the fight. I think once he was in there, he gave the widespread audience that maybe hadn't seen him fight before a very good taste of what he brings to the cage. Like Big John said, I think there's plenty of room for improvement as well if he can get that cardio down. But he went in there, he fought a guy that was a ranked UFC fighter. The big criticism about MVP, people had always said, oh, well, he doesn't even take the tougher matchups in Bellator. He doesn't fight the better contenders over there, which if you've followed the last few years, you would know that's not necessarily true. So for him to go in there, beat ranked opposition, a guy who's a bit of a tricky puzzle in himself, and Kevin Holland, and just totally frustrate Kevin. The frustration was visible on his face in that third round. When MVP knocked him over and did that little dance, and Kevin got up, he looked so annoyed at what was going on. That I think that if I'm a UFC fighter, I'm not jumping off grabbing my phone and calling Sean Shelby and saying, hey, I want him next. I think it's going to be tough for the UFC to match make Michael Page going forward, and largely due to the fact that he is a frustrating, tricky puzzle to figure out.
Dude, it's like guarding Michael Jordan. At some point, you're going to get posterized. You're going to be on ESPN highlights, and it's going to be pretty embarrassing. But Nolan, you were there. Tell me what it was like, man. Was MVP getting some love, or was he kind of the enemy because he was coming from another promotion?
No, I think it was all love. If anything, I think there's we talk about the UFC audience or maybe the casual fan. I think when somebody comes in with that level of hype, right? Like, oh, this is the big dog from over there. I've never seen him fight before. Let's see what he's got. We saw the same thing with Michael Chandler. Like, Bellator did such a good job of making both those guys stars in that organization that it's almost very easy for the UFC to just be like, just from the unknown, from the let's see how he does here sort of angle, is just sells itself. And then you add MVP's ability on the mic, his highlight package. I mean, you tune into that, you see all sorts of weird stuff that you've never seen before anywhere else. And then he goes in the cage and he brings some of that showmanship there too. So I think the fans bought into it, and I think they're excited to see where he goes from here as he moves his way towards the title.
You know what's ironic is I think of some great Bellator signings, like Chandler knocked out Hooker, Ben Askren submitted Robbie Lawler, this win right here with MVP over Holland. But let's not fall in love with that, because a guy named Eddie Alvarez came over and fought Donald Cowboy Cerrone. He dropped his first fight, but he became a UFC. You just don't know with the sport. And like Big John says, these are great MMA fighters fighting other great MMA fighters. Embrace them and give them your best and root for them. Let's not have these dividing lines, man. And it's great to have multiple organizations. Gives all these fighters even more chances to be prize fighters, and it's competition for the promotions as well. So I'm glad that he was getting some love. All right, Goes, how about you, man? Give me a grade here. We've heard A-, B+. What would you give him for the whole week?
For the whole week, put everything together, I give him an A-.
Okay.
I think it's kind of interesting when you look at the UFC and the way they do things. You can kind of feel the way they look at a situation when they bring a fighter over, right? Like Ben Askren, we'll give him as an example. He comes over, he gets Robbie Lawler. You're not doing him any favors. Like, you can tell what you're trying to do when you give him a guy like Robbie Lawler. Like, come on, that we can tell the tone of what the UFC wants to do there. With MVP, it's been a little different, man. They've been really welcoming to that guy. They gave him his own entrance, right? I thought that was cool. They gave him vignettes. He had good mic time. The fight itself, it was interesting. You know, I think what he did was he kind of took the home field advantage away from all the UFC fighters. If I am a UFC fighter and I'm going to fight MVP, the first thing I'm asking for is, can we please do it in the Apex? Because I do not want that giant cage and have to chase him around. Like, he really just sucked that home field advantage away from the UFC fighters and put them kind of on blast. He's a difficult guy to figure out. He's fun to watch. And I'll tell you what, he didn't finish Kevin Holland, but if you look up and down that guy's record, you don't have to go very far before you find a absolute devastating KO. So I do not want to be the second or the third guy in line here, because once that guy gets his groove going, he's going to be pretty hard to touch. But the UFC, whatever it is, their recipe, whatever it is to get to the title shot, however many fights it is, for a guy like MVP, I feel like it's going to be one less, just because he's that marketable. He'll have that big of a highlight reel. So if I'm MVP, I really put everything I have into these next couple fights. I think something big can come out of it. I thought it was kind of funny with Dana White's comments towards him. Like, Dana White seems to love him. It's funny because he was praising him for the same things that he was kind of criticizing Kevin Holland for. That's the guy that was in the same cage as him. So I really think the UFC's putting a lot behind him. And when that happens, you know, we were talking about in the first topic, Sean O'Malley, like, look what can happen to some of these fighters. MVP's tough, man. I think he can go a long way. Just got to pick the right matchups.
Goes, you ain't lying. There have been some violent finishes for MVP in Bellator. In fact, John, I think you once told us that the most violent finish, or the one that shook you up the most, was the Cyborg, right? Evangelista, that knee to the forehead, like he crushed his skull.
Look, you're, as a referee, you're used to seeing lumps and bumps and things. You don't ever want to see dents. Okay, and that's what I saw out of the front forehead of Evangelista Santos on that fight. And it's not only that fight. This is the thing about MVP that people are not. MVP has damaged more fighters with one blow than I've ever seen anybody else. Look at what he did. He fought Yamauchi. Right? Yeah, Goichi Yamauchi. One kick, he destroyed his patella tendon, blew it up off of his kneecap, comes up into his thigh area. You look and you go, who does that? Look at what he did to Derek Anderson. He's done it so many times. If you make a mistake against this guy, he is incredibly dangerous. Kevin Holland got away without getting knocked out, without all that stuff. That would have moved me to that A+ for the week. But look, if there was anything, he got away without being truly damaged by MVP, and that's a good night.
Yeah, 36 years of age, but man, that guy's still lightning fast. How he can cover so much ground and still land on someone's jaw is simply amazing. You don't see too many people in MMA that can do what he can do. Guys, who would you match him up against next? Quick round of horn here on that. John, who would you match him up against?
You know, I got to stick with what I've said before in the past. I've always looked at Wonder Boy, Stephen Thompson, and I've said it for years. Boy, I would love to put MVP and Stephen Wonder Boy Thompson together because, God dang, it could be just an incredible fight. Now, it could also end up being a stinker where they kind of cancel each other out or not sure about things. I don't think it would. I actually think it would be an amazing fight. So I'm going to go with Stephen Wonder Boy Thompson again.
Nolan, what do you think?
I kind of like the idea of Jeff Neal. I think he's like the perfect, not only in the rankings is he the perfect next step up, but I also think his skill set, like Dana said in the post-fight press conference, like we got to be careful how we matchmake him, right? So
Yes.
I think Jeff's clinch work, his little more well-rounded in his attack than Kevin Holland, but he still has what the UFC is looking for, and that's ultimately somebody that's willing to throw down and try to trade with Michael Venom Page as well.
All right. How about you guys? Who would you match him up against?
Well, I think, the thing about MVP is that a lot of people don't talk about is his age. He's starting to get up there, and I think there's no wasting time here. I would say go after a big name, go after Ian Gary. I think the trash talk is going to sell that fight. Hopefully they don't get into a fight before the fight. Those two are going to want to murder each other, and the fight itself, I think, can be a lot of fun. It'll be really interesting, and it's a win-win for the UFC. Whoever comes out of that would be in a really, really good position. And like I said, I feel like that line is just a little bit shorter for a guy like MVP. Good fight, and Ian Gary's still kind of a younger guy too. Maybe you could take advantage of some things there, but I think that'd be fun.
Ireland versus England. I love it. I was going to throw out Shavkat Rakhmonov, but he seems to be probably next after Mabala Muhammad, so just ahead of MVP. But you never know. You never know with the UFC. These are all excellent names. We're halfway through the show, and don't forget you can help out the show by hitting the like button and subscribe. And again, thank you, Big John McCarthy, for hanging out with us for today's episode. Check out his show on YouTube, Weighing In with Josh Thompson, former Strikeforce lightweight champion. These guys get down. Excellent show. Lots of knowledge being spit at every week from these guys. We move on to topic number 4. Over in the sport of boxing, Anthony Joshua. Man, he viciously knocked out our guy, Francis Ngannou. Ngannou's now 0-2 in boxing, though he was definitely lauded for his efforts in his first fight versus Tyson Fury, which was a close split decision loss. Where and when would you like to see Ngannou compete next, guys? Back to Nolan.
I think it's time for Francis to come home for a fight. Maybe beyond that, there might be more boxing, but I think it's time, particularly with the fact that there is a very worthy opponent, fresh face in Renan Fajeda, who would provide a quite explosive matchup for fans in the MMA realm. Francis went over to boxing and he did things that people did not expect. I think a lot of us doubted him going into that Fury fight. That will be a moment that will always be a highlight of his career, right? He did something truly special. He made a lot of money. He kind of ventured into the unknown. He paved kind of a new path to show what is possible of MMA fighters. I just think that at this point in time, given how that last one went and the fact that he has this deal with PFL and that MMA fans are kind of hoping to see him, and I'm sure he'll make a lot of money in this MMA fight as well. Maybe not obviously as much as boxing, but he'll make a good solid chunk of change. I'd like to see this happen towards the end of this year where he comes back and fights the behemoth, the fellow behemoth in Renan Fajeda.
Yeah, it's not often you say fight the big guy to Francis Ngannou, but yeah, he's all of 6'8" is Renan Fajeda. Wow. All right, I'd love to see that one. But Goes, what do you think, man? Is that Fury fight too big if he gets past usage? Do you match them up there, or do you bring him back to MMA? Or maybe has he just done his job and should he just retire?
No, I think, look, you have to praise Francis Ngannou for everything that he did when he went over to boxing. That Tyson Fury fight, and I call it that, a fight. With Tyson Fury, it was a fight. With Anthony Joshua, that was a boxing match. And I think that's why it went down the way it did. You do not gain those skills overnight. What Francis was able to do was tremendous. Lots of praise. But, eventually technique, all that stuff, it catches up to you. And Anthony Joshua did that. The KO was so bad, man. And keep in mind that this is boxing where even the first punch, right? Then the second one that put him down. Like,
yeah,
in our sport, and Yeah, and in our sport of mixed martial arts, there's a follow-up to that, and you're either getting choked out or they're finishing the job. In boxing, they give you time to get back up and then suffer another concussion, right? So this is something that doesn't just get erased off of Francis Ngannou's brain just because he's coming to mixed martial arts. You have to rest your body, you have to rest your mind, take some time and get that done. When it's time to jump back into a camp, make sure it's mixed martial arts. And when you do that, you have to take some time to kind of reset, get back into mixed martial arts training. It's a different cardio, it's different timing, rework your reflexes. You have to get all that down before you jump into your camp. Don't just take a fight and jump into camp. Really, really take some time and get back into the swing of things. When he comes back, he made a commitment to the PFL. He made a commitment to his fellow colleagues, right? Like, mixed martial arts can be one of the most selfish sports of all time. And what Francis Ngannou did, not just for himself, but for the other people of the sport, was tremendous. And I think he kind of does owe that commitment to the PFL. Get that fight done. Maybe then, if you get that win there, maybe you can call it quits on MMA and just say, look, I've done what I've done. I want to focus on boxing. But even then, like, who are you going to fight, right? Like, it's got to be somebody way lower, because the guys at the top on their best nights, they're going to give him a lot of trouble. I think people want to see Francis Ngannou in boxing. I think the boxing world likes him to be in that mix, but I don't know that it's really a long-term answer. I'd say maybe a couple more fights left on his career, but the first one definitely needs to be at the PFL in mixed martial arts.
John, you've seen a lot of KOs up close, but what did you think of this one, and what do you think Ngannou should do next?
This is part of what happens when people have tape on you now. They break you down. They see what you do as far as what's offensively good, what's offensively bad, what's defensively good, what's defensively bad. And it was clear that Ben Davidson in Joshua's camp broke him down, and they had a plan. And the plan was, look, he bites. He brings his hand down to parry a lot, especially when you go to the body. You take a look at what Anthony Joshua was doing. He was jabbing to the body and just waiting for those big reactions, and he got him. And the same combination put him down 3 times. And just like Go said, those are 3 serious blows that he took. That is a serious concussion. A lot of people don't realize, and Francis said it best. He goes, I got knocked out. I know it didn't hurt. It never does. The brain doesn't have nerve endings. But it's a serious injury, the same as if he had broken his leg or broken his arm, and people would be going, oh my God, give him time. Give him time. Give him time to come back. I think he should come back to MMA. I think he should go back to the PFL. He's never fought there yet, and so it's time. He's got a great opponent to match up. They can build that fight. Heenan Fahea is a monster, way bigger. And look, at Francis is big, but Heenan is big. And I think you're going to see Francis need the time to get his wrestling back, because he's going to want to wrestle against Heenan at times. He did the same thing against Cyril Gane. If you take a look at him coming back, there's so many good things he can do. Heenan Fahea went through a 4-fight season to get $1 million. He's guaranteed at a minimum $2 million to fight Ngannou because of what Ngannou negotiated. So he's the first guy going, please come back. Yeah. And you take a look at Francis. He has so much going with the PFL. They've set him up as one of the directors for the PFL, Mina. He wants to get fighters out of Africa coming into MMA and start to build that. There's so much good he can do. I would like to see him take a break. I'd like to see him not fight until late fall, early winter. But once he comes back, I hope it's in MMA.
John, a quick follow-up. I think this is a good comment from Omnipolar777 in the chat. He says, only a few boxers, I wouldn't say only a few, but yeah, I get what he's saying. Not many boxers have ever mastered both stances, yet Francis was switching stances in his first boxing match and now his second. Do you think he was kind of almost, because of the learning curve, maybe putting too much out there instead of sticking to basics?
No, that comes from MMA. His ability to switch stance, he's used to it based upon what he's done in MMA and what he's learned there. Because look, in MMA, you're getting your legs eaten up, and people are trying to kick the low calf kick has become something that is a serious weapon. And if you don't understand how to either defend against it or be able to switch stances to make it to where the negates them being able to do the same kick, it's a problem. He was used to that. the problem for Francis when it comes to boxing is no different than anyone else. Once people get a read on you and there's a blueprint now, we're going to go after this blueprint. Tyson Fury didn't have that. He just looked and said, oh, a lot of guys hit hard. He got hit by Francis with a shot and then went, oh shit, this guy really can smack. I got to be careful. And he was for the rest of the fight, and he just jabbed himself to a victory. You could say he won. A lot of people think he lost. Doesn't matter to me. But once they have that tape on you and they can build that blueprint, it's a different story. And all the things that you do that are a mistake in the sport, they become glaring. And that's what happened with him against Anthony Joshua.
Yeah, that's a good point about the tape that was out there from the first fight. So, and you're right, that hand just was nowhere near where it needed to be, and that straight right was just a missile. It was sad to see 2 knockdowns and that vicious KO. I want him to just not fight till the end of 2024 at the earliest, but I would love to see it in MMA, and I think Fahey has earned that. Okay, guys. Let's move on here. Alexa Grasso and Valentina Shevchenko will coach the next season of The Ultimate Fighter with a subsequent trilogy fight to follow. What are your thoughts on this pairing? Are you in or are you out? In other words, could they have picked 2 other fighters? Or do you like this? I think this is the 3rd or 4th time now that females have been coaches on Tough. What do you think? And we go 2 goes here.
I'm in on the show. I'm one of those people that still watches it. But the selection here of coaches, it's either going to be a hit or an absolute bust. There's going to be no in between because with these 2 girls, the way they conduct themselves, they're very traditional with martial arts, but they're very competitive too. And there are times where if you ask Valentina Shevchenko the right questions, she can get a little edgy, but you have to pull it out of her. And I don't know that Alexa Grasso is really the type of person that's going to do that. You have to remember that nowadays, like the hardcore fans that tune in, we're not really looking at the talent as much as we used to back in the day because we have all these systems now, all these feeder systems, and we have Dana White's Contender Series. Now Tough has really, really come down to the coaches, the interest in them, and knowing that they're going to fight. And that was kind of taken away from us a little bit last season with Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor. They gave us a whole season telling us these guys are going to fight, and then here we are still waiting for that fight, right? So everything's going to lie on those champions, and I think that's a lot of stress. I don't know how they're going to handle it. It's got to be entertaining, though, because the days of early Tough, the reason it was so successful was we were starving for any type of combat. Now there's a fight almost every night. Every weekend there's something, right? That's another day of the week that you're asking for time to sit there in front of the TV and watch mixed martial arts. You better come strong with whatever you have. But I'll tell you one thing. If I'm on that show, I want to be on Alexa Grasso's team because Valentina Shevchenko, I've seen her train straight up. You are not going to have a good time. Get me on Grasso's team.
All right. How about you, Big John? This pairing of Grasso versus Shevchenko, which again kind of ties up the division. There's some killers out there waiting, right? But it sounds like they're already going to start filming soon. It's going to start airing in June. I see maybe the Sphere in September is when they might throw down again. But
you think? I look at it and it's first off, I love both of these ladies. They're both phenomenal competitors. They're both sweethearts as individuals. But I think the Dana White Contender Series has really taken over Tough. The Tough has to play out for a long time, where the Dana White Contender Series, it's quick. You see someone, you go, wow, that person's good. All of a sudden they're being signed. All of a sudden they're in the UFC, and it's a quick process. Just like Go said, it's really about the coaches when it comes to Tough, and I don't see either, Valentina or Alexa being that person that's going to go after the other and be the Conor McGregor versus the Michael Chandler. It worked because they both kind of went after each other. Michael kind of started a little bit slow with it and then finally said screw it, and it builds drama, but it takes away from the fighters to a point. But at this point, I just don't think, and just like Go says, there's so many fights out there. I think that the Tough has done its job. It's been a fantastic series, but how many people watch Survivor anymore? It's the same thing.
And they're not even producing big names like they used to. Katona, Holobaugh, no disrespect to them. Some of them were comeback, featured as comeback guys.
Yeah.
Muhammad Usman, Juliana Miller, Brian Battle, Ricky Turcio. It just seems like the better talent is coming out of the Ultimate Fighter. To be fair, let's go to Nolan. What do you think, man? Are you into this pairing? Yay or nay?
I think timing wise, it makes sense, obviously, because of the Sphere and Noche UFC. So that seems like a layup. I'm about that. I think as the guy that's been the Tough recap guy for Junkie for the last 3 seasons of Tough, first season was a little bit of a chore, I felt like. Second season, last season, I actually very much enjoyed it. But why was that, right? Let's go through it. It was because of Michael Chandler and Conor McGregor as the coaches. It was because there was a theme that was unique, and there was no warming up process to the fighters because half of them were fighters that we knew from the past. We already kind of knew their stories, and there was this element of like the last chance sort of thing. So I think that was great. And then the fights ended up being really, really phenomenal last year. Sometimes I think historically Tough, some of the guys have fought kind of safe. Really, it's different than Contender Series, right? You can just go out there and win. You don't have to go out there and really wow Dana and get a big finish. So the fighters last year killed it. This year, you don't have Chandler and Conor as coaches, even though they probably could have done it because they still haven't fought. And then you also don't really have that extra theme. I know they in the press release, they said, well, this is the most international season. There's 14 countries represented, but it's not really part of like the X's and O's of the whole thing, right? So to me, I think it's an interesting choice. I'm glad that there aren't other divisions getting clogged up, but I'm not really sure it's going to, especially coming off of the Conor Chandler season, it's going to, I think, be glaringly obvious that heat isn't there between the coaches that you need for Tough to really be successful.
Josh Wallace in the chat says Tough needs a different aspect, like veterans versus prospects. I think they just had that actually, and didn't work out too well. The vets just wiped the mat off. But he does says maybe a tough season of fighters transitioning from other sports. That might be interesting. I've seen other reality shows where they bring in, what was that? I think she was a sprinter or something. Lola Jones. Remember, Goes? She was on that show. The challenge. Remember, maybe bringing in from other sports might work out. A shout out to Big John McCarthy from Giants fan in Culver City. So great stuff there. Thanks again to Big John McCarthy for joining us here on today's show. We do this show every Monday, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. So not only hit the like and subscribe button, hit that bell so you'll know when we're on live, and boom, you don't miss a minute. I see a lot of comments coming in. You guys are still talking about O'Malley. That was 45 minutes ago, players. So you got to start with us at that exact time. Guys, Joanna Champion is headed to the UFC Hall of Fame this summer. What was her most memorable highlight in your opinion? We go to Big John McCarthy for this one.
Oh, if you're going to say what's her most memorable, I'd have to say it's her loss. I'd have to say it's her loss to Weili Zhang, and just how tough she was in that fight. You take a look, that's what she had was we have subdural hematoma, which is horrible. Then thank God it wasn't that. And then we have an external hematoma where it's not broken open. It's between the skull and the skin. And you saw her head turn into something that a human head is not supposed to. And she kept fighting. Yeah. And this is what I love about Joanna. And I had Joanna when she lost the title against Rose, and I've reffed her a couple times, and she is such an intense competitor. But it's her ability to be that intense competitor, and then as soon as it's over, she's the nicest individual in the world. She's a sweetheart, and I think she's done so much for women's MMA, because there was a point there where, women's MMA is, it was between a couple of people. And then she came on the scene as the strawweight, 115 pounds, and made people go, oh, even the lighter weights, they can be exciting. Wow, they can actually have knockouts. Wow, look at what she can do. Look at her stop the takedowns. And her and Claudia Gadelha had a little war going for, the first fight, and then going through the coaching of Tough and stuff, and it worked. And I will just tell you that I absolutely believe that she is a fantastic choice to be in the Hall of Fame. She deserves it, no doubt about it. And one of the best women's MMA fighters that's ever put on the gloves.
How about you, Nolan?
Yeah, I mean, that's that has to be the right answer for when you talk about her and her career of what she'll be remembered for. I mean, that fight was the greatest women's MMA fight ever, in my opinion, or right up there. And she came in at a time too where the UFC needed her. She filled a void that fans were familiar with some of the Strikeforce talent and some of the bigger names over there for the heavier weight classes. But when it came to implementing the strawweight division, it was a lot of Invicta fighters. It was a lot of fighters that people weren't familiar with. And so for her to come in and really her journey from her UFC debut to become champion, I think it's exactly what the UFC needed at that point in time. And she'll go down, hopefully, I think she's getting the respect that she deserves. She'll go down as one of the greatest to ever do it.
Goes?
I enjoyed the Claudia Gadelha fights, the back and forth between those two. It brought so many eyes on the sport. But she did change the game, and like Nolan said, she came around at a great time. Like when Ronda Rousey, when we started to lose her, we didn't really have a fighter that had kind of that same swag, and she carried that. And like John said, once the cameras are off, once the fight is done, she's just one of the sweetest people. She's so much fun to just kind of hang out with and have a conversation. And technique wise, her punches, her kicks, her knees, her elbows, they're just so spot on, man. Like that, she is a prototype that a lot of fighters should follow.
You guys covered it well, especially John took a lot of my thunder, but you guys are the stars. You're the panel. I'm just the lowly host. But I did want to say one thing to what John said. She's very nice. She's a sweetheart. She's mean in that octagon. But you know what I really can appreciate is her courage overcoming adversity. Like you said, John, that hematoma, and then those losses, because she used to get in people's faces at the weigh-ins, and so she was all in, right? But then when it didn't go her way, I've seen a lot of fighters over 17 years of covering the sport, 31 years or 30 years, whatever we're at, of being a fan. A lot of them can't take those losses and they run away. They want nothing to do with it. And yet there she is showing her face. That's why she's going to be a great ambassador for the UFC. She shows her face. She knows that's just not her best moment. The losses, the KOs and everything, but that courage to overcome that adversity and still show her face. I think that's so inspiring to young girls who obviously, and nowadays it's so hard to grow up with social media and everything. And yet there she is, man, answering the bell to life, enjoying life, showing herself off on social media, just how much she's enjoying the fruits, of all her victories. So good on her, man. Well-deserved, Joanna. Got just in time for one last additional here. So let's get to it, guys. Back to boxing for this last news nugget. Mike Tyson and Jake Paul have agreed to a fight. We don't have all the details on the match itself, exhibition, glove size, all that. I'm sure it'll be the 10-ounce gloves because it's from 154 on up. That's usually what they do, but we don't know, right? It's definitely on, though. July 20th in Arlington, Texas. Are you on board with this matchup, and who do you think will get their hand raised? Nolan?
Am I on board with it? Not really. 57-year-old guy stepping in the cage never makes me feel or I guess in this case, the ring makes me not necessarily feel great. I'm sure it will do great numbers. I certainly think from a business perspective, I understand it. I think Netflix getting into the live combat sports is maybe one of the silver linings of this whole thing, and we'll see where they take it from there. But to me, I guess there's always kind of a threshold in terms of age where it really makes me tough to get interested in it. I think head injuries when you're over the age of 50, I don't care who you are. Obviously, Mike Tyson's in fantastic shape for somebody his age, and we've seen some of those training videos of him hitting bags, and he still can pack quite a punch. But there's just something about a 57-year-old guy potentially getting smacked in the head pretty hard that I don't know. It's not necessarily my thing, but
you think Jake Paul's going to win?
Who knows, man? I mean, I guess we'll have to see how many rounds it is. I think age is just such a big factor. So I probably, but that's kind of sad for me to say, but
goes.
It's not really my thing either. I know they say power is like the last thing to go, but when they say that, they mean like your late 30s, early 40s. They don't mean 57. So like this is just such a tall task for him, years since that Roy Jones fight. Look, here's the one thing that I will say. Jake Paul, for what he's done, I respect that he's gotten in there and he actually does try to get better and he respects the sport along the way. One thing that Mike Tyson does that a lot of people can't replicate is when they're in close, he can hit you from just about every angle at a speed that is pretty nasty. So I give him somewhat of a shot, but at the end of the day, he is 57 years old.
Big John?
I hate it. I can't stand it. It drives me
Ooh.
crazy. I put out a tweet. Someone asked me something about Jake Paul, and one of the things I said is Jake Paul's biggest problem is he fights old men, and there's a reason why he does. And I'm just going to say it straight out. Look, I love Mike Tyson, and Mike Tyson was a great fighter. But what do you think is going to happen if you put Joe Montana on a football field right now? Okay, how good do you think it's going to look? You know, there is speed in sports that Mike Tyson has lost a ton of his speed. And the other thing is, look, I'm 61 now, okay? And I still train, but not like I did. I can't, and Mike can't, because I don't care how good a condition you get in as a 57-year-old, almost 58 when that fight happens. You cannot maintain that conditioning. Anything happens, it goes right out the door, and it takes you forever to kind of get it back. And then when you go into that ring, he's going to get tired. He will get tired much faster than he ever did before based upon his age. Yes, he will have some power, but he doesn't have the speed to get that power to the target in the same way. I look at this and I go, man, shame on everyone for this whole thing. And it's, take a look at what happened with Evander Holyfield against Vitor Belfort. Okay, I'm friends with Evander, and I said, don't do it. And he went and did it, and look at what happened. Okay, and if you're going to tell me that Vitor Belfort, and I love Vitor, but he's not a better boxer than Evander Holyfield, but he could beat an old man that was 50-some years old. All right, I really hope that this thing in the end doesn't come about. Everyone is seeing Mike as the Mike Tyson that we all fell in love with. Mm-hmm. The Mike Tyson that was just an animal, would go out there and huge power and just annihilate people. That Mike Tyson is gone. That Mike Tyson doesn't exist anymore. And that Mike Tyson is what's needed to put Jake Paul on his ass. We're not going to see that Mike Tyson. And so, unfortunately, you're going to see Jake Paul win this fight. And I just hope Mike doesn't get hurt if it comes about.
I'm not into the fight, but I think Tyson can still knock him out. But, John, could you, if you grappled Mark Zuckerberg, who would win? Just grappling.
There's a difference between grapple. First off, I have size, strength.
I want to see that on the
a lot more experience. I'll take Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not getting punched, and I can slow that down to anything I want. And I'm telling you guys, look.
Did you do it on the undercard of this?
I stopped.
Match
I was just gonna say.
Yeah, I stopped sparring when I was 52. Okay, because I was getting hit by guys that were not that fast, and I saw what was coming, and I couldn't get my freaking big old head out of the way. And it's because I was slowing down. And age has this ability to make it to where we all, Mike, I know Mike, he looks at himself and he feels like, I'm like 30. You're not. Your mind keeps you kind of young, but your body just doesn't respond in the same way. And I love Mike Tyson, and I don't want to see anyone getting the best of someone who's really, he's got the name. That is our guy. We know that's his face, but it's not the Mike Tyson that we've all seen fight.
When you realize your age, guys, Nolan, please pay attention. In the middle of the night, if something happens in the middle of the night, the way you get up and respond is so much different than in the middle of the day. That's when you realize, holy shit, okay, I just don't move the way I used to.
Oh,
yeah,
not at all.
Big John, I want to thank you so much for being on this week's Spinning Back Clique. We really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Again, folks, tune in to Weighing In with him and Josh the Punk Thompson on their YouTube channel. They do great stuff there. John, we look forward to your year with PFL in that new role there. So congrats on that. I'm sure you'll knock that out of the park just like you've done everything else in our sport. Our sport owes you a lot. You're a Hall of Famer. For all the things you've contributed to it. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Nolan and Goes Cold Coffee on the ones and twos. And most of all, you all for tuning in every Monday to Spinning Back Clique. We'll be back next week. Same bad time, same bad channel. We'll see you then. Go out and be a champion.